This is 5 Minute Feng Shui, episode 55, Feng Shui for Troublesome Neighbors. Welcome to the 5 Minute Feng Shui podcast, where each week I talk about how to move energy and make money. You'll learn how to create a prosperous home and an abundant life using classical Chinese Feng Shui. I'm your host, Katie Weber, publisher of the Red Lotus Letter, Feng Shui Easing for Wealth. Each week, I'll cover Feng Shui topics that can help you improve your life, share inspiring stories, and always end with 3 easy-to-implement Feng Shui tips that you can put to work right away, and usually in about 5 minutes. Now let's get started on the 5 minutes that could change your life. Today's episode is something that almost anyone can relate to. We've all had neighbors who may not have been our favorite people to live next door to. Sometimes, you have no choice and you have no idea that you've moved into a nightmare next door until you move in. And it's a problem that it can grind on you and wear on your energy, and because day after day you've got somebody that is, either aggravating you in some manner, not keeping up with their yard and maybe the maintenance of their home, that kind of thing. And this can create one, it can devalue your property. It can also create animosity. We have neighbors that run all kinds of types, the type that borrow everything and return nothing, or maybe they're the kind that shows up with a plate of cookies when you moved in. But those are the neighbors that we don't really need to worry about. It's the ones that really are troublesome that we're talking about here today, because you never know what is going to create a problem for you until you're there. So the better neighbors and the neighbors you don't know are rarely the source of our unhappiness. It's the ones who have the dog that never stops barking, or whose teenagers bounce that basketball all night long, or up against the house, that just drive us wild. One client and her husband were at wit's end about some neighbors who were hostile on one side and neighbors who collected junk cars on the other. They felt like they were in a sandwich between neighbors who were just very problematic for them, and it gave them a lot of frustration and a lot of unhappiness about being in their own home. But they wanted a really strong and powerful cure. In Hong Kong, for instance, there are residences and buildings that have been known to go to some pretty drastic measures when the energy from a neighboring building threatens their businesses or their livelihoods. And in some instances, they will employ cannons. I know that sounds crazy, but they will actually it's a fake cannon, not a real cannon, but they look like they're real. They will put those either outside an entryway. So for instance, one shopping center had a garage that was built directly opposite it, and it had escalators going up and down that created an X that was directly opposite the building's entrance. Well, because it was an X opposite the building's entrance, the concern is that it was going to slow down business. It was going to say, stay away from this business place, and people wouldn't come, and they were worried about a severe drop in income. So what they did was they bought a cannon and created like a statue outside, aiming that cannon directly at the cross that was, or the X that was on the building made by the escalators. And what they noticed was they did have an uptick in business once that cannon was in place. Now they're also used, these types of cannons. They are symbolic cannons. Sometimes they're used in a variety of ways, either through some sort of like transmitter or antennas that are placed on top of buildings when another building is constructed that maybe is pointing at the building. And there's some really great examples of that in Hong Kong. But the strength of this symbolic cannon symbolically destroys the opposing force from harsh edges or images or symbols. And now in these cases, they believed that the energy being emitted was a killing type of energy, the kind that can lead to bankruptcy or serious illness. Now, for my clients who are having this problem on both sides with their neighbors, I suggested using mirrors to kind of push back at them. And but unbeknownst to me, this client bought a tiny cannon and aimed it at both of those neighbors' houses. They were the type that you would sometimes see in secondhand stores, or used to be collectible things. They were only about like 8 or 10 inches in size, but she ended up positioning these toward both of the neighbors' houses, and within a short period of time, both those neighbors moved on. So this is an extreme example. I don't recommend that you actually point a cannon, either 8-inch or a regular size cannon that is not a working cannon. That's pretty. This is rarely needed for neighbors in this case. But if you've got really difficult neighbors, I know that can make you want to do some drastic things. So let's just talk about how to handle negative neighbors with Feng Shui that isn't quite so drastic as aiming a cannon at them. Now, of course, this also depends on the situation. So sometimes your neighbor, it's just they're annoying. Maybe the kids are screaming, or their lawnmower starts on Saturday morning at 7 a.m. when you're trying to sleep in. But some are more serious and pose a threat. Like maybe you have a house that becomes a tenement. That's what I had an aunt who lived across from a beautiful old Victorian home that was chopped up into a bunch of apartments, and she said it became a tenement. Now, the way we would describe it in terms these days would be, that's a crack house. And she was in an older neighborhood, and this particular home just kept going downhill. It was on a big backslide, and it became worrisome and threatening for her because there were multiple people living in that home, whereas it used to be one family. And they were obviously doing things that were illegal, and it was clear that they were doing that. So, how do you handle these sort of situations? You've got to determine what type of neighbor you have, how serious the threat is. Now, here are some problems that are pretty common in some of the Feng Shui ways that you can create a better environment where you live and maybe handle some of that energy. So let's talk about apartments. Now, in an apartment, you're closer to your neighbors, so it's easy for them to get on your nerves if they're playing their TV too loud or something like that. If the problem is from a neighbor who's directly across from you, you can just place a small mirror on your door to reflect the neighbor and that neighbor's negative energy. If the problem is a neighbor on the right, as you look outside of your door, hang a metal 6-rod hollow wind chime on this side. This will help lift some of that negativity away. And if the neighbor is on the left of you, you can place an image of a dragon on the left, or place a nice healthy plant on the left side of your door, and that can help foster some better feelings and kind of shield you from that energy. I also highly recommend is that you keep your light on at all times. Many times when we're dealing with people, we're talking about anger, depression, activities like yelling or arguing, music too loud, stuff like that, and just keeping your light on at your front porch at all times. One, it's a safety thing. Number two, it helps to kind of dissipate that energy. So there's 3 ways that you can handle some of that energy that from neighbors when you have apartments. Now, if you're in a home, there's a light remedy that you can use for troublesome neighbors. Now, light is really an effective way to boost Feng Shui, but it's also a great way to stop a situation, particularly for nighttime annoyances. So one client of mine had a problem with the boys that at the neighbor's house next door. They'd all gather in the driveway around 10 p.m. just as she's wanting to go to bed and start playing basketball, and they would play until 2 or 3 a.m. And it just so happened that where they played on that driveway was the side where her bedroom was. So I recommended that she place a motion detecting spotlight on this side of the house that have like those 2 big bright spotlights, and it would shine brightly on them and be kind of an annoyance. So every time they look up at the basket, they'd have this big bright light in their eyes. And let me tell you, it made a huge difference. She installed it, and within a few days, the basketball stopped, and they went down 2 blocks away where someone didn't have that light on. So they might have been able to, smoke weed or do something and not be under the glare of a spotlight. Now, this is also helpful if your neighbor's dog barks all night. Shining a bright light at the house can sometimes help barking, and it's a really helpful way to use light to stop barking. So there's a thought: if you've got the neighbor's dog is barking a lot, you can try to shine a light on that. That will also help. Now let's talk about another method for managing gossip. So if you've got neighbors that are gossipy, or they just have some ill will, and you feel that ill will in the neighborhood, you can handle that with some yin water. Now, this is a type of water so that is just like a large basin. So if you've got problems with that hostility, or just neighbors that are just grouchy and not pleasant, you can add a really large mouth basin of water between you and that neighbor. Now that could be like a big open bowl of water that maybe you put some, you can put water lilies in it or something, just to kind of make it look kind of attractive. It's a good way to absorb negativity and to kind of soften those relationships between you and your neighbor. And when you combine the water with a mirror, this is another way to kind of handle tension and ill will. And by mirror, you can use a mirror on the side of your house. You can kind of aim it at the neighbor. And I think a more subtle way, and one that's more landscape friendly and attractive, is one of those reflective gazing ball type situations. I think that's a really nice way to manage that. Now there is another way that you can handle that, and that's with metal. This will help you transform gossip and negativity. So if you want to create better energy from, let's say, the harsh corner of a neighbor's home or some malicious gossip, just try hanging some tinkling bell type wind chimes. I know you've seen those. You can use a 6-rod hollow wind chime to put on that corner, and that will help lift some of that away. But I also like the tinkling bells, because that tinkling sound is soft and sweet and kind of can disrupt that negativity. I like that quite a bit. Another way that you can handle that is the type of moving art forms. I don't know if you've seen those metal sculptures that look like wheels or whatever. They move around and they circle. And this is a good way to kind of chop through negativity. So this is a nice way to kind of add something that adds to your landscape, and that kind of cuts through all of the talk and the negativity. Now let's talk about using color. So color is another method for dealing with difficult energy. So for instance, white is a very yang color, and it can transform neighborly attitudes to be more friendly and amiable. By painting your home white, you emit strong yang heavenly energy outwards. So it makes it more difficult for negative energy to be bothersome for you at home. This has worked really well for extreme cases, like for instance, homes that are next to cemeteries or hospitals or churches. There's 2 things that you can use to really to help that negativity from neighbors, and that is really beautifying your home, painting it white, and then surrounding it with lush landscaping. This one of the houses that I've always marveled at, that was surrounded on 2 sides by a very large old cemetery, was this gorgeous home with this giant oak tree, and they had magnificent planting all around the house, all on 3 corners, and then a beautiful oak tree out front. They had lush landscaping and a bright white house. The landscaping is growth and chi energy, and they had a visual block with the hedges, but it was also the hedges promoted growth, and it brought great curb appeal to the house. The white energy repels negativity. So these are some options for you, is to invest in your landscaping to create barriers, physical barriers between your neighbors, especially if you've got a neighbor that's, I would call an unsightly neighbor. That would be the neighbor with the rusted out station wagon that they park on the front lawn, something like that. It's really interesting that when you put energy into your home, a lot of times your neighbors kind of pick up the slack. It inspires them. So that's one way to handle bad neighbors, is just to do better on your own home. Now, let's talk about using the happy method to lift energy and make your neighborhood more friendly. So if your neighbors are unhappy or unpleasant, try placing happy items like, pretty colored windsocks, whirligigs, or anything brightly colored in this part of the yard. Anything that is happy colors. Happy colors help to disperse energy. You can also use, if you have a window on this side with this neighbor, you can also hang a faceted crystal ball so that when the sunlight hits it, it disperses that negativity. And anything that's covered or in bright colors, it's really hard to be mad. And this is a really good example, and that is, and I'm not getting political here, so please don't send me emails about it. And I'm not saying one way or the other whether I like this particular president or another, but each president has something to offer, lessons to learn from. And the president that I want to talk about is President Reagan in the 1980s. He is one of our most popular and most beloved presidents, and a lot of people said that it was his personality, which he'd smile at everybody and anything, which is in itself disarming. So smile at your neighbors, wave at them all the time, smile and wave. It is amazing how that can transform even the most negative person. Smile and wave. And then the other thing is, he had on his desk a jar of multicolored jelly beans. That multicolor, that rainbow assortment of colored jelly beans is very endearing. So whenever you're looking at difficult situations, either for yourself or with your neighbors, adding lots of bright multicolored things will help lift that energy and make it a happier one. I really like this idea because, I think we need to build bonds with our neighbors if we can, and kill them with kindness, if anything, and or not kill them, but, maybe just make them more livable with kindness and with happy colors. So I like that. Plant pretty flowers and bushes on that side of your house. Multicolored flowers, that's a great remedy for lifting the chi and the energy with your neighbor on that side. Now, let's talk about one thing that you don't want to do. Now, this is something a lot of people do, and I heartily encourage you not to succumb to this. I don't care how many websites you've read online that say this is the way to handle things. It's not. And please trust me when I say this. There is a thing called a Feng Shui mirror, and you can find them at Chinese emporiums and places like that. And they have, it's an octagon and has these broken lines all the way around the mirror, and you face it out at any offending thing. Now, you can use those if, like, the highway terminates at your front door. Other than that, you never want to use these, and that's because the energy that you send out comes back to you, and it can be very negative. And I know this because I used it, and I ended up having a very severe animal attack as a result. So I tell you this from experience, and I tell you this from all the teachings that I've learned with Feng Shui masters. You don't want to use Pakwa mirrors. They're dangerous, and they actually can come back to you. They emit strong, harsh energy that you just don't want to put that kind of energy out there. I'd much rather if you're going to put energy out to build a fence, or plant some shrubs, or hang some wind chimes, or put out a whirligig or metal moving kinetic sculpture. I don't know if that's kinetic sculpture. You know what I'm talking about. Those new metal type of art that you can place out in your yard. Any of those things is preferable to hanging a Pakwa mirror. So please, I hardly encourage you to avoid that. Okay, so we've talked about some ways that you can manage your neighbors if you've got neighbors that are bugging you, and tops on. Let's talk about those 3 tips. I always like to leave you with. Then the first one is don't use the back wall mirrors. Avoid that at all costs. That's number 1, and I can't say that strongly enough. Don't use them. Number 2, use plantings to create barriers to ugly views or just soften the edge between you and your neighbor. Maybe just create a nice green barrier between you so you don't have to look at their sideways glances or their mutterings or whatever. Number 3 is try happiness. Repel that negativity by planting some pretty flowers, adding whirligigs or anything with multicolors on that side. You can add gazing balls that are colored to kind of push that energy back to them. And I'm going to throw in one last tip, and that's tip number 4, and that is smile and wave. It really makes a difference. It can break down barriers if you just smile. Start with a smile or a nod, and then kind of work your way up to waving. It's amazing how people want to clean up their act when they start to like you. So I hope that helps, and I hope that you don't have any troublesome neighbors that you have to deal with. But if you do, you got some ways to handle them. All right, this is Katie signing off for another episode of 5-Minute Feng Shui. Thank you so much for joining me. If you want more tips like this and delivered to you in your email inbox, be sure to sign up for 28 Days to Prosperity, my free e-course. It will send you daily tips as well as you'll receive my weekly email. And you can get all kinds of great, juicy feng shui goodness right in your email inbox. All right, have a great day. I'll talk to you on the next episode of 5-Minute Feng Shui. Thanks for listening today to 5-Minute Feng Shui. Be sure to join me on Facebook at facebook.com/Feng Shui Katie. And if you're really ready to move ahead quickly, head over to redlotusletter.com and sign up for my free 4-week e-course, 28 Days to Prosperity. You'll get daily lessons and tips on how to get unstuck and create financial flow in your life. Make it a fantastic day.